really great to be here. And as I kind of go through my talk, I'll maybe explain more why I think it's so important to get out to communities like this on what is obviously some of the most important topics of the day. So I'll start with just a brief, who am I? Why am I here talking to you? While you look at a awkward official photo of me. So as Dave said, I'm Brandon Wales. I'm executive director at CISA. And my responsibility is really focused on how do we make sure that we optimize what CISA does? How do we make sure that we optimize the services that we deliver and work on behalf of the American people to help secure our physical and cyber infrastructure? And at CISA, we've got two main missions. One, we serve as the national coordinator for cybersecurity and resilience, critical infrastructure security and resilience. And that means we work across the federal government with every department and agency that has a responsibility of engaging with the critical infrastructure community. So think the Department of Treasury to work with the financial services sector, the Department of Energy working with the energy sector, and so on, to make sure that we are as effective as possible at improving the security of the infrastructure that Americans rely on. And the second main mission of CISA is to serve as the civilian cyber defense agency for the US government. And so we have a lot of unique work that we do inside of the federal government to help secure the federal government systems, working with 101 civilian federal agencies, everyone from big ones like DHS and the Department of Justice, down to small and micro agencies like the Marine Mammal Commission. And each one of those agencies is responsible for their security of their IT systems. And that means that a big agency that has large federated networks, very complex to manage and secure, down to very small agencies who have very few people and don't have the bandwidth or resources or expertise to do the type of security that's needed against modern threats. But we don't just work inside of the .gov. A lot of our focus is externally facing. What can we do to make improvements in the cyber ecosystem so that the threats that we're facing don't manifest in the types of consequences that we're most concerned about? And I'll focus most of my attention on that. But I wanted to start with just a little bit of why this moment is so important and what about the threat environment today means we have to operate differently when it comes to cybersecurity. I think there are two main trends that we are seeing in terms of the threat environment that are driving this type of necessary change. The first is the growing rise of geopolitical threats to the United States from advancing nation states. And this comes on a couple of different, in a couple of different ways. First of all, nation-state competition is heating up. And I think we see this every day in the news, competition between the United States and China, the competition between the United States and Russia, most acutely manifesting inside of Ukraine. But more importantly, the technical capacity and capability of our adversaries in cyber is improving. Their ability to hide and obfuscate what they're doing is improving. 10 years ago, we tracked a very long list of Chinese intrusion sets against United States critical infrastructure. Today, we track this many Chinese intrusion sets, while their capacity and capabilities have grown like this. And that's because it is much more difficult today to fully track what they're doing because they no longer give off the same signatures. They pump and dump infrastructure for every single operation. They're not using static IPs. Every operation that they conduct is off of different infrastructure, usually leased US virtual private networks that make it difficult to keep track of them in real time. They're also no longer using, in many cases, custom malware. They live off the land, meaning it is far more difficult to fully attribute who's conducting these operations. And it just puts a lot more burden on the network defenders to be able to find those needles in the haystack of what's happening on your network. If they're using your own administrative tools on your network against you, how do you know whether it's the Chinese or your system admin who just launched some PowerShell command on your network? So nation-state threats are enormous, and I think we have begun to be far more public about what that means. So in February of this year, the Director of National Intelligence released their annual threat assessment. And in that threat assessment, the language it uses related to Chinese threats to the United States is pretty stark. It says that in the event of a conflict, China will target US critical infrastructure for disruptive and destructive attacks for the purposes of affecting US decision-making, sowing societal panic in the United States, and disrupting the flow of US military support into Asia. And more importantly, they said they have the ability to execute those attacks today. About 2 months ago, we, along with NSA and the FBI, released an advisory right after Microsoft released a blog about detecting the presence of Chinese intrusions into critical infrastructure to pre-position for future attacks. And again, 10 years ago, the Chinese were noisy. They were using their cyber tools to gather economic and political espionage to help advance Chinese technology, and that is still happening. But now, a lot of their capabilities are being focused on how do they prepare for future conflict with the United States. And that preparation is happening now. The second major threat trend is the growing sophistication of criminal organizations. And that has a lot to do with increased specialization of their work. Again, 10 years ago, there were plenty of cyber criminals, but they were self-contained. Today, there are criminal organizations who specialize just in gaining access to systems and then selling that access, data access brokers generally, or access brokers. There are ones who specialize in setting up botnets and then renting those out to whoever wants them. There are ones who set up ransomware as a service and then make those tools available to anyone who will pay a portion of the ransoms that they get when conducting attacks. And what this has meant is it has lowered the barrier of entry of these types of criminal organizations to conduct the attacks. That, coupled with the rise of cyber insurance, making it far easier, reducing the friction in terms of paying ransomware crews off, has resulted in an explosion of ransomware attacks against cities, schools, police stations, hospitals across the country. And when we start seeing, which we have, ransomware crews with the ability to execute attacks against 0 or 1 day vulnerabilities, when we see that their ability to move from vulnerability being disclosed to full operationalization through automation at scale, like we saw with the MoveIt vulnerability a few months back, I think that is our future. So if those are the trends, what are we doing about it? So we released earlier this year our the CISA Cybersecurity strategic plan. And it was based on kind of what direction we are going and derived from the direction that we get from the White House as embodied in the National Cyber Strategy that was released at the beginning of the year. So inside of our strategic plan, we have identified kind of 3 main goals for the agency. 1 is to address immediate threats, 2 is to harden the terrain, and 3 is to drive security at scale. And I'll touch upon each one of those. I think each one has important considerations for why we need to do things differently today. So when it comes to addressing immediate threats, there are a couple of really important initiatives there. Things like improving our visibility in terms of what is happening in the cyber ecosystem. If our adversaries are no longer using very detectable and recognizable malware, that means that our ability to detect them is going to be based upon real visibility, understanding of what's happening on networks, and the ability to detect anomalous activity at far more granular level. Also, just the reality, When we set up our cyber defenses, even inside the federal government, almost 2 decades ago now, it was largely focused on detecting known bad activity at the perimeter. Well, with modern encrypted communications, your IDS systems at your perimeter are no longer capable of inspecting most traffic. And so the place where you actually need to dive into the details and you're able to see malicious activity is going to be on the endpoints. More needs to be looking internally than externally. And that level of visibility needs to happen at the federal level, needs to happen in the private sector, and we need the ability to kind of get a better picture across the board. And so Congress, and also just, we don't know when all the cyber incidents are happening. We're one of the few countries where there is not a required reporting of cyber incidents to the government, so we lack visibility in terms of what's happening on our cyber landscape, and then can't advise other companies when there are compromises that they could then protect themselves against. So Congress last year gave us the authority to require cyber incident reporting. We're working through the lengthy regulatory process that the federal government has to go to, but the draft rule should be coming out early next year. We want to improve our ability to kind of coordinate vulnerabilities and help industry understand which vulnerabilities should be prioritized. Something like 17 or 18,000 new vulnerabilities are reported every year. That is an enormous number. And if you are a CISO at a company and have to manage a large enterprise, you are overwhelmed with the number of vulnerabilities that you have to close. It's really easy for us to sit back in DC and say everyone should patch. But every patch at a large enterprise is a significant undertaking to make sure that those patches don't break operational technology, that we can, that the patch will work as designed. And what we want to bring to the table is our understanding of what is happening based upon that improved visibility for where you should focus your efforts. So we started releasing something called the Known Exploited Vulnerability Catalog to say these are the vulnerabilities that we know adversaries are using today. So if you have a choice about which vulnerabilities to patch, these should go to the top because we're seeing active exploitation, and that's based upon information that we are seeing directly, what the intelligence community is seeing, what our partners in the private sector are seeing, what our international partners are seeing. And then also we are working to improve our ability to do joint cyber defense plans with industry. So we set up something back in 2021 called the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, where we pull together the largest companies who have the best insight and visibility into the cyber ecosystem. The large cybersecurity firms, the large cloud providers, the large technology companies, the large ISPs, because they have the ability to operate at scale and help us gain some additional insight and visibility. I like to say, it's really hard to get 150,000 water utilities inside the United States to do anything. But if I can get to the 5 companies that provide all of their technology and they make a change, well, now I've scaled that across the board. But we've got together this JCDC and started working on joint cyber defense plans for what we would do under various contingencies. And we actually stretched our legs during the run-up to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, developed a cyber defense plan with our key partners 4 months before the invasion, since we had been saying it was coming. We were seeing intelligence that Russia was preparing for the invasion and started working with our partners immediately on how we would be prepared in case Russia decided to retaliate. And thanks to those efforts, we were able to gain faster insights than ever before. We were getting malware in real time from US companies that were operating in Ukraine and using that information to improve network defenses across multiple platforms in the US. So the second goal is to harden the terrain, and there, the most important thing is we need to understand the attacks that are happening in the United States and overseas, because those are going to inform what we do. I think we like to say we don't want any attack to be successful more than once. If we are seeing an attack, we want to understand what the tradecraft that was used and what we can do to help harden and protect future victims. We also do a lot of work to break down different types of capabilities. What are those gaps that are out there, and how can we help fill them? We are lucky. We've got a very robust cybersecurity private sector ecosystem in the United States that offers a lot of capabilities, but there are some things that the federal government can bring to bear that no one else can. Both our understanding of the adversary and the tools that they're using, our ability to bring together both red and blue sides, and work with companies to really make improvements in the day-to-day security of our systems. And I would say a lot of that work is geared towards kind of the small and medium-sized companies. If you're a Fortune 100 company, you've got a very robust cybersecurity team. You probably have multiple vendors on contract. Some of our products are going to help you prioritize what you do, but there is a lot of work that we're going to be providing to those medium-sized companies that don't have that. They may have a small IT staff, but they don't understand kind of what are the steps they should be taking. And so, for example, we worked to take the very complicated NIST cybersecurity framework that refers you to several thousand pages of NIST special publications that no one has ever read all of, and we distill that down to a set of 30-plus most essential cybersecurity controls that you should be building into your network. We refer to them as our cybersecurity performance goals. And we break these down by cost, complexity to implement, and impact. So if you have a marginal dollar, where should you invest your cybersecurity effort, given your level of sophistication and what you could bring to bear? So those are some of the ways in which we are looking to improve and harden our terrain. And then the last, and I would argue the most important goal, is to drive security at scale, because we have too broad and too complicated an infrastructure to try to deal with this in an ad hoc way. And I think the first and most important part of that goal is what we can do to improve the underlying technology base that our infrastructure relies on. We have a multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity industry because we have a multi-trillion-dollar insecure technology industry who have pumped out software and hardware that is riddled with vulnerabilities, many of which are long solved for and have easily been addressed. So I mentioned the MOVEit vulnerability earlier. That was a SQL injection vulnerability that has been solved for, I want to say, 15 to 20 years, easily fixed, yet caused hundreds of companies around the world to be compromised, millions of individual PII exposed. And so we actually just on Monday of this week released the second product, this one with 17 international partners, on what do we mean when we say products should be secure by design? What does that mean for the design, the deployment, default, the configuration management, et cetera? Because ultimately, I think what is going to improve our cybersecurity is not bolting on more complicated tools. It is going to be designing and building technology that can withstand the threats against it. Now again, this is not going to erase threats. We're not going to solve all of our problems. But today, it is nearly impossible to get to the signal out of the noise because the technology is so riddled with vulnerabilities. And that, I think, is the thing that could have the broadest impact. And you're already starting to see change in industry. They recognize this challenge. And so some companies have come out and said that they're going to start only working on using memory-safe languages for their code base instead of the legacy programming languages that can cause memory safety vulnerabilities, which have been among the largest classes of vulnerabilities reported in any given year. The second aspect of this goal is focusing on how we can understand the cybersecurity implications of emerging technologies, things like quantum computing and its effect on encryption. The topic of the day, which I've likened repeatedly to fifth grade soccer, which is AI. For us, AI is just software. And all the challenges that I just described apply to the future of AI. And I think we are trying to work with industry to make sure that the lessons of the internet age don't repeat in the AI age. Are we going to build security in upfront in the right way into these systems? Or are we going to rush to market and deploy the next generation of vulnerabilities that we'll be working to close for a generation? And more importantly, on things something like AI, today all of the focus is on the frontier labs in terms of what models they're building. But there is going to be an AI supply chain, and there is going to be security considerations at every aspect of that. So the models will be developed by a relatively small number of companies, and then there'll be some open source models. But there will be thousands of companies that will be integrating AI into software applications. That is going to be the most essential point at which security needs to be baked in very tightly. And then as you move to deployment of those software applications into businesses across the country, what are the new considerations that they need to understand, and how do they work to secure those applications as they're deployed in their networks? What is the risk-based approach that they use to ensure security of applications that are being used for critical or life safety operations? And then the last, and this is the point that I'll end on since we're speaking at a event sponsored by a university, is to grow the cyber workforce. Now again, this is a monumental challenge given that cybersecurity is so essential. And since every company today is a technology company, every company needs to also be a cybersecurity company. Now, that does not mean that you need to have a large staff of cybersecurity experts, but it sure means that you need to understand what your risks are and how to manage them. And are you gaining the right expertise? And are you able to bring in the right security providers? Do you ask the right questions of your MSPs that are providing you critical services for your enterprise? No one has cracked the code on how to solve the workforce gap that we have on cybersecurity. There's a lot of paper the government releases on this. The National Cyber Director released a workforce strategy earlier this year. Again, we are one part of that. And there are things that we are doing to help and make a change here. And a lot of what we're doing is really focused on training and development. So we sponsor work that is designed to improve the pipeline very early on by developing curriculum for use in K through 12 education. We work with a number of universities to kind of sponsor cybersecurity efforts and help improve the connectivity between local businesses and the universities who often want their students to get some practical experience. And I know that exists here at Anderson. But that is so important. And that needs to be thought of at every single university. When companies come in, when I talk to companies across the country and they ask what they can do in the workforce, I ask them what their relationship is with every local college, whether community college, university, in their area. Have they talked to their cybersecurity departments at those places? Because those students are hungry for experience, and those businesses are hungry for fresh recruits. And this is not going to be a problem that we solve only at big universities. This is a problem that's going to need to be solved in every single community across the country. And there's a lot more that we can get into, but I want to leave plenty of time for questions from all of you. I just want to say thank you. Obviously, your interest in this topic is important. I see a lot of what I'm assuming are students, since you look to be the same age as my daughter. And that is fantastic, because we need more people in this business. We need people who are thoughtful about it and who are willing to spend all day at a conference. Although it's not too nice outside, so I guess it's being better to be inside than outside today. But just thank you for your interest, for your passion in this area. And if you want to come work at CISA, come find me after the meeting. We're always recruiting. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Morrow, for this presentation. And with all due respect, I thought my coffee would wake me up. What you say really woke me up. So I have two quick questions in respecting your time and also the attendees' time. The first one, how CISA protect itself, given that in the U.S. we enjoy freedom like I didn't enjoy in my original country, Venezuela, where it's an dictatorship. That is one. And the second one is, you mentioned that there is an initiative with technology companies in the U.S. to join together. They join cyber collaborative.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if, this is hypothetical, if the Chinese government or Russian government or a lot of government that have billions of dollars buy these technology companies? So I will let your opinion. Thank you.
Yeah. So both are good questions. So obviously, as a cyber defense agency, our own internal security matters a whole lot. So we do a lot of thoughtfulness about kind of our own security architecture. I think we often pilot our kind of newest services on ourselves. So for example, in the wake of the SolarWinds campaign back in 2020, we worked with Congress to get additional funding and authority focused on improving the hardening of cloud-based business applications, think Microsoft Office 365, that we use across the federal government. CISA is itself the first user of a hardened cloud that we've been working on for the past 2 years and that we're slowly rolling out. We actually release a lot of the technical reference architecture for that publicly, so you, industry, can have the same conversations about hardening their cloud environment. But this is, cybersecurity is not a one and done, so this is something that we have to look at every single day to make sure that we're following the same advice we provide out to the rest of the country and that we really try to be best in breed. Your question on kind of foreign purchases of critical infrastructure is a real serious one, but I would argue that it is not at the, we're not necessarily worried that China is going to buy Microsoft. But there is a process in the United States for how we review, for national security risks, foreign investment in the United States. So if China wants to buy a technology company that may be only $100 million, but makes important and critical software or hardware, has critical customers, whether it's US government or infrastructure, there's a process that is managed by what is called the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. It was actually set up in the 80s to deal with concerns around Japanese purchases of US critical infrastructure. But today the focus is predominantly, and again, it reviews all foreign investment from nations in terms of in certain segments of different types of companies. But the one that drives the most focus and attention are Chinese purchases of technology companies. That being said, there are lots of ways, and investment is not always the best one, to get what they want. You can do joint ventures that don't have to go through that kind of review. You can work to set up where many technology companies do development work in China using Chinese engineers. So they don't need to purchase a company to be able to influence and create real critical supply chain risks to technology. So there is work that we are doing that tries to provide advice to companies about how do you manage complicated supply chain risk when you may not have another choice. There are some, there's hardware and software that only comes from places that you are not going to fully trust. And that is a fact of life, including some very critical ones. But that doesn't mean that you throw your hands up. It means that you put into place the right set of security controls around that. If you've got a device, if you've got a network that has to operate certain potentially risky technology, you have different kinds of logging and controls around it. And I think that's okay. We've got to deal with the hand that we're dealt. And for me, it's about being thoughtful in when and how you take risks. If you've got to operate risky technology, then understand that you have to increase your focus, attention, and resources around securing it. But there is a lot of work in the US government on the question related to foreign investment. It is something that we've looked at carefully. And I'd also say that it's less about any individual one purchase and more looking at what they're trying to do over the course of 5 to 10 years in terms of cornering the market in certain technologies and others. So looking at this very holistically is what we're really doing now.
It's not a secret that the U.S. government has a red tape and bureaucracy with hiring going on. You talk about recruiting. We have many students here looking at the future. What is CISA doing within their bounds with direct hire authority and those types of avenues to be able to streamline folks into positions? Jenny Easterly has obviously been a big proponent, building a great culture there at CISA, and kind of trying to work through a lot of those things, but still there seems to be many roadblocks to getting positions filled and people in the critical spots.
Yeah, no, this is something that has been a very high priority for us. So, and I think through a combination of hard work and rebuilding our human capital team and some different authorities that came online in the last 2 years, like we have made a real difference here. So our time to hire has reduced by about 30% over the past 2 years. It is still hard, particularly if you are coming into a position that requires a higher level security clearance. But we are much more thoughtful about which individuals need those higher level security clearances. If you are being hired to come be a pen tester and you're going to live remotely and probably never get into a SCIF, well, we're not going to give you a top secret security clearance because that's just going to add time to you coming on board and you don't actually need it for the execution of your job. We also have some additional authorities and we fully utilize them, whether it's direct hire authorities for 2210s, which are basically in the federal government declassification for IT personnel, both on kind of network and security side. But also in the last 2 years, we had a new authority come online called the Cyber Talent Management System, CTMS. And this is an entire new system, completely different than the pay system that the federal government uses for most of its employees. It provides us a far more flexibility. There's a bit more rigor up front because there's a bit of testing that's required. But with that additional testing comes kind of higher pay and some enhanced benefits to the program. It also has some flexibilities in terms of how we bring people on, and the process works extremely quickly. So just to give you a sense of scale about CISA's growth over the past several years, in FY 2019 and FY 20 together, CISA had net gains of about 110 employees. That means total number of hires minus attrition. We had gains of about 110 in those 2-year period. The following year, as we began to make some real systemic changes in how we hired, we went from 110 over 2 years to 230 in 1 year, net gains. FY 22, we went up to 250 net gains. And then in the most recent year, we've hired net gains of over 500. So if you want to come work for us, we can make it happen today. Far more efficiently, far more effectively, and with much better pay and benefits than we've had in the past. And I think across the government, there is a drive to say, how do we make this better? Because this work is essential, and the federal government is competing with very aggressive offers from industry. But I think the thing that we can compete on is mission. The work that you're going to do with us is unlike work that you'll do anyplace else. And we know we're not going to keep you forever. But the experience that you'll get with us, the insights that you'll gain from the work that we do across critical infrastructure, with state and local governments, working with the intelligence community, it is both incredible and rewarding, and I think will pay long-term dividends for anyone's career.
Excellent presentation, thank you. My question is surrounding state and local government. So as you look at the different state agencies, there are mom and pops behind the scenes that are working to protect the various agencies. Quite infrequently will you find a big cybersecurity team in those agencies. So I'm trying to understand what CISA is doing to help those state, local agencies, if you will. Thank you.
Yeah. This is obviously a huge challenge. So there's a couple of things that we have done to help make improvements at the state and local level. So the first is we sponsored and have sponsored for many years something called the Multi-State ISAC, the MS ISAC, which provides kind of shared services for state and local governments, for everything from intrusion to detection to help triaging incident response to malicious domain blocking and response-related capabilities, almost all of which are offered free of charge based upon the grant that we give out to the MS ISAC. But that doesn't build a lot of capacity at the state and local level, and that's where I think we need to do more. We worked with Congress, and in the infrastructure bill, we got $1 billion for state and local cybersecurity grants over the course of 4 years. We just released the second notice of funding opportunity for states to apply for those grants. Again, 80% of that money needs to flow down to the county level. I was actually meeting with the director of IT for the city of Carmel last night on my way to the hotel, talking about some of the challenges that they're having, even with the programs like this. One of the things that we are trying to do is help enable, through these grant programs for the state, to create a shared services that then it can provide to all of the communities that are below it. Because we should not expect every small community to have to develop their own organic cybersecurity capacity. That is a recipe for failure. And so how can we centralize what works and build capacity that can help get economies of scale and concentration of expertise and capacity. So this is a work in progress, but I would argue we have the same exact challenge with small companies across this country, many of whom are essential parts of supply chains for bigger and extremely critical operations in the United States. Third-party risk is the number one concern that is expressed to me by every large corporation that I work with. So you are not alone. There are things we're doing to help, and we have, throughout this country, cybersecurity advisors and state cybersecurity coordinators who are located throughout the country to work with owners and operators to connect them to CISA's capabilities. There are tools that we offer. There are services that we provide free of charge. Again, it's not a panacea, but all of this is designed to help make a difference. And so for the folks in the audience, if you want to get connected to the CISA team, we've got 2 of them in the audience. We've got our protective security advisor, and then we've got our cybersecurity advisor in the back, formerly of state government, so she knows a lot about this. Patrice over there, and Steve, there he is. Steve, so they are here, they are in Indiana, and they are designed to be a resource for you. So get connected with them at the end of this, and those connections can pay long-term dividends. Question over here. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. A great presentation so far. Due to 2 key things. One was cyber at scale, what was mentioned earlier, and then you also mentioned the controls around the risk with technology that they can't operate without. What's CISA's kind of guidance and coaching on the balance of governance and tech as you drive scale?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It was a topic of long conversation last night at our dinner. It is invariably true that cybersecurity is first and foremost a people, process, and governance problem, and a technology problem second. If you get the governance right, it is far more likely that the technology will come along. So a lot of what we do, and particularly what we recommend for a lot of entities that we work with, is you have to start with kind of understanding your risk, putting in place the processes that actually will enable you to understand and manage it. And then as companies grow, or as you start dealing with bigger enterprises or agencies, figuring out how governance is going to work across complicated federated architectures. We have huge governance challenges in the federal government because particularly at large agencies that have kind of very empowered elements of them. So DHS has 8 main operational components: CISA, TSA, Coast Guard, FEMA, et cetera. We have a relatively small CIO and then have a huge 300,000 person organization. But each of those component heads, my boss Jen Easterly and the Commandant of the Coast Guard, are responsible for what we're doing. So what does the governance look like to make sure that the CIO at the department, who the secretary is ultimately responsible for all the security, has effective oversight and some degree of control, even though he doesn't fully understand what's happening on all of those different operational component networks. And the same is true of large companies that have multiple business units with different profit centers, et cetera. And each of those are powerful. The state and local government, you'll have kind of similar challenges. We were talking last night that you could have elected officials running different offices, each of which who are empowered and can say, well, I don't want to use your IT services. I'm just going to build my own because the people elected me and you can't fire me. So governance is essential, and it's the thing that we started with first, and we could not have made the progress we have improving federal cybersecurity without making improvements in governance. The ability to have understanding of what you need to do and the ability to actually effectuate that across an enterprise. And it's not easy. This is going to be the hardest problem. Mapping that out and then building a culture that allows you to do it. That is what it's going to take. But once you have that culture and you understand your risks, you've developed processes to make improvements, then it's easier to say, okay, what technology is going to enable this process to work best? And you're going to have lots of options because startups keep throwing new software at us every other day. And so the technology will come, but it requires the understanding of what you need to do and the ability to actually do it across complicated organizations.
Is there one last question?
Absolutely.
Mindful of your time? He's a very busy man, so be very mindful.
Sure, thanks for the talk. I just wanted to hear a little bit more about, in the cybersecurity consulting sphere, especially when you're giving an organization, a new architecture, a new threat design approach, any of the largest barriers besides being slow to adoption or the bureaucracy that CISA would face?
Sure. So I think, and we're not alone here, and I've spoken to kind of all of the largest consulting companies that provide advice to major elements of the private sector. Think, Accenture, McKinsey, EY, et cetera. The thing that I think gets us is the kind of complexity of integration of cybersecurity tools. If you go to a large company, they could have 150 plus different cybersecurity tools operating on their networks. And then you wonder why their SOC analysts are not detecting everything that's happening. And so I think what's important, and again, this will be different levels of companies, different sizes and scales is going to have different challenges. If you're a small company, it's a matter of what should you be doing versus what you should be having someone else manage for you. I like to say that if you cannot secure your network, you probably should not be managing your network. And so can you have someone else manage it for you? And if so, do you understand the risk that you're taking and how to secure your connections to those managed services? Are you configuring it right, or are you exposing your data in ways you did not intend? But as you get larger, the biggest challenges tend to be kind of integration of different tools and sensors to be able to give you the right level of insight. Because if you don't have that, and if your analysts have to switch between 6 different screens to try to understand even the most basic things that are happening on your network, are your tools throwing off too much noise that's interfering with your ability to pick up the signal? That is extremely important. And what we have found and what we have heard also from some of the companies that actually work to do this is that kind of simplifying your ability for your analysts to detect what's happening, that more tools are not necessarily the answer, and the ability to kind of integrate tools that work together is really essential. But then again, this assumes that you've done a lot of the pre-work, that you have the right security culture, you have the right governance, you understand where your risks and you're managing them appropriately, you understand where your high-value assets are, and you have enhanced controls around those. You've minimized your attack surface. You don't have depreciated ports and protocols open on your network that are easy to exploit. Once you've done the basics, as you get up the level of sophistication, we're talking to large companies, the integration challenges tend to be the ones that are most acute and often could be the difference between successfully detecting an attack early or detecting it too late. But really important question. So just again, thank you everyone. Really appreciate your time. It has been great to be here, and I'm going to go spend a little bit more time with some of the folks from the cyber program at Anderson. So thank you.